When you get a community.
Hillary and Alex, this is Jennifer.
Hold them up.
Bear with me. It looks like we're having some issues here. So if it drops off again, it's because I'm trying to restart it.
So then the Mahajo. That's the Merced. But that's.
I was in Merced for school.
Yeah. Worked, came out of Sac State, went to work in our city of Merced for just shy of 7 years. Then I was as the city of Turlock for 20. And then I'm in one.
Oh, okay. Yeah, after school, I hopped to MIT Merced Irrigation District as an intern. Then hopped over to Canelo as an intern. Then worked for their packaging team in their corporate engineering. Then I started commuting to the Bay for a bit with the geotech firm I was with, and then I'm with the.
Yeah, I did capital projects in Merced and Turlock, and then
Okay.
the latter half I went into development.
What capital projects you do in Sherlock specifically? I live in Sherlock right now.
Oh, we rebuilt the intersection of Monte Vista.
Okay.
Part of the development team rebuilt Monte Vista crossings.
Okay. Did you work with Toby?
Oh yeah. Toby and I were hired within about 2 months of each other.
From Sherlock.
Thanks for joining us. We're going to be just a couple minutes here waiting on it to show up, hopefully. All right, we're gonna get started here. Can you hear me, Jennifer?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Perfect. All right, so the time being 1:35, we're gonna call the March 13th, 2024 STRGBA meeting to order. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Here in the room, member agencies, we have Tim from the city of Modesto. We've got Mike from the city of Waterford. We've got me, Eric from Oakdale Irrigation District. From MID, we have John. From Stanislaus County, we have Christy, and City of Oakdale, Ian's here as well. So good attendance. Only agency we're missing is City of Riverbank. So that's good. All right, so we have a quorum, business from the public. So at this time, interested persons from the public are welcome to introduce any topic within the agency's jurisdiction. Matters presented under the heading may be discussed, but no action will be taken by the agency at this meeting. So anything that's not on the agenda from the public. Nobody in the room. Nobody online. Oh, sir. Mr. Burketto.
Good afternoon.
Would you mind double checking, make sure that mic is on? Is the green light on that mic right there? Kind of turn it. Should be a button.
Yeah, so,
Perfect. Thank you.
no, we're all concerned about groundwater and aquifers, but I've been around here for a while and I'm an advocate, proponent of surface water use. I've noticed, like the city of Riverbank doesn't use any treated surface water. Oakdale doesn't, Waterford doesn't, even though they have a connection. And there is an extensive amount of groundwater pumping in areas of OID by investor farmers and in wide areas. And then there's people in the wide areas that use almost exclusively surface water. So what I'm getting at is I think that, going forward to solve these issues, I would like, as you get into the, what do you call it, the management areas, and that discussion, I would like to see it approached as a whole basin approach so that we can solve these issues. And then there's some people that pump groundwater and sell it out of the basin too. So one of my hydrologists says, he looks at it like you're in a fishbowl. So if you're in the lower end of the fishbowl, the people at the upper end get affected. And that's what he told me like 15 years ago. You might have some merit to it, I don't know, and I think also, as far as if you're in this Modesto subbasin, I think it's a 14th Amendment issue on how you approach these issues, and you got to treat everybody the same, paint them with the same brush, and treat them out without prejudice or indifference. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the members of the public on items not on the agenda? All right, moving on. So item number 3, this is the February 14th, 2024 last meeting, our last GSA meeting, the meeting minutes from that. Assuming everybody's had a chance to review those minutes, I'll entertain a motion. Motion by Mike, seconded by Tim. Thank you. Open it up for public comment on the minutes from the February 14th meeting. Member agencies, any comments first on the meeting minutes? No. Okay. Members of the public. Okay, seeing no hands raised, nobody in the room. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, item number 4 is the annual report for the water year 2023, the draft results. So this is we're actually gonna have 2 different presentations here. The first one's gonna come from Todd Groundwater, and then we're gonna move to Woodard and Curran. So Liz, you start us off.
Can you hear me? Is this on?
Jennifer, can you confirm you can hear us?
Looks like it's the green light is on.
Yes, I can hear you.
Before you start, let me see if I can share my screen here.
Is it 26 maybe the font behind that really first edition?
You see my screen, Jennifer?
Yes, it can.
Thanks. Some of the people calling in, if there's anybody who's not muted, if you don't mind muting yourself until you have a question, you can just kind of hear some background there. Oh, I'm probably gonna have to stop the share and go to the other screen because you're not gonna be able to see that voice. So let me do that. Usually Jennifer helps with this, but let's see back here. This. Okay, Jennifer, can you see the presentation up there?
Yes, looks good.
Okay. Good to go.
Well, thanks for having us. My name is Liz Elliott. I work for Todd Groundwater. We have a couple of presentations for you today. So as you probably know, Todd Groundwater is working with Woodard and Curran, or the team that put together the annual report this year. And so Arden and I from Todd will start out and discuss some results that are in the annual report that you haven't seen yet. And then Dominic and Jignan will talk about model and model results that you haven't seen as well. So next slide, please. So in previous meetings, we have presented and discussed the groundwater elevation analysis and results. So we're not going to go over that again during this meeting, but we are going to go over other results that you haven't seen during these meetings and we haven't presented. We're going to start out, I'm just going to go through the schedule, kind of summarize the schedule through the end of the month. As you know, the annual reports due April 1st. And then discuss the water quality analysis, go over some reported dry well analysis that we did for this annual report, and talk about the subsidence analysis that we did. So to start out, this was the calendar for February and March that we put together for completing the annual report. It includes both report items, which are circled in red on the calendars, and meetings that were scheduled that are circled in green or blue for the TAC planning group, green and blue for the GSA meeting. We are now at March 13th, the first GSA meeting, with another one scheduled for 2 weeks from now. We provided a draft annual report to the GSA on the 1st, and so thank you all for reviewing it. We received comments from you and for the process of revising and finalizing, not finalizing, but working on another draft. And that next draft is going to be completed tomorrow, and then will be, as far as I understand, Eric, put on the website, right? The STRGBA GSA website. So by the end of tomorrow, it should be on the website and there'll be about a week of public review period, with that ending on the 20th. And then we will incorporate any public comments and finalize the report by the 26th or 27th. And then we'll meet again on the 27th. And then after that meeting, we will submit this report to DW. We'll upload it to their website. It's due on April 1st.
Yep, so the plan is another GSA meeting 2 weeks from now to get this report approved, so we can get it submitted.
Okay, so I'm going to pass it off to Arden to talk about water quality analysis.
Thank you. My name is Arden. I've been conducting the water quality analysis for the past few years for the annual report. I'm an assistant geologist at Talk Water. So I want to first start by providing an overview of what undesirable results mean in the GSP, because it's a little bit convoluted at first glance. So our definition is provided in the slides, but I'll break it down a bit. So undesirable results occur when we established a monitoring network for water quality. And in this network, there are 7 constituents of concern. Those are arsenic, nitrate, uranium, total dissolved solids, 1,2,3 TCP, DE, and DDCP. And each year, we look at the wells that are in our established network, and we look at, is the concentration in this past year a first-time exceedance of the MT? MT being defined as the maximum contaminant level for each constituent of concern. Or this year, have we historically seen the concentrations above the MT for a given constituent of concern? But in this past year, has the concentration been greater than we've historically seen in the past? Is it a further exceedance of the MT? So we look at that, and then for the potable water supply wells, we then look at, is this increase in the concentration potentially caused by GSA management activities? And that could include water levels that are dropping beneath the water level MTs in the vicinity, or it could be actions like recharge programs that could be exacerbating the water quality conditions. So in the water year 2021 annual report, we established this baseline monitoring network. We looked at all of the wells with publicly available data that were measured for the constituents of concern in water year 2021. And we defined these 361 wells as our baseline monitoring network. And of those, we identified the maximum concentration from water year 91 to water year 2021. And each year we go through and we compare the concentration of the past water year to the historical maximum concentrations for these baseline wells. So on the next slide, we downloaded the data for this past annual report from the GeoTracker Gamma database. So this is all publicly available data. And we compared these past year's concentrations to the concentrations from 91 to water year 2022 to see, are there any first-time exceedances of the MCL, or is there a further increase where the wells that have already been observing concentrations greater than the MCL? And then we individually looked at the potable water supply wells that did kind of be marked by a new maximum above the MCL. And we looked at the surrounding water levels and the patterns observed in the time concentration plots to determine if it appeared to be related to GSA management activities. And in the annual report, we have 7 maps that showed 7 constituents, and then we walk through some of the individual wells. So I'm not going to go through all of those maps. You can go to the next slide, but I'll go through nitrate and TCP and the wells that we identify as ones that we needed to look into further. So this past year, out of those 361 wells, there were 187 wells in water year 2023 that were measured for the constituents of concern. So this year we were looking at 122 municipal wells, a couple domestic wells, and then the wells and clusters that used to be in that figure are generally wells that are monitoring wells at regulated facilities. So they're not potable water supply wells, but we like to keep an eye on them just so we can get a sense of what's going on in the basin. And I want to note that the little gray dots that y'all see on this map, these are the 174 baseline wells that weren't monitored during this past water year. And one of the main reasons why they're not monitored is because they aren't required to be reported to the state every year. Some wells are kind of on a 3-year reporting cycle or a similar cycle. So on the next slide, this is the map for nitrate concentrations. And so the wells that are green or are black are wells that either had concentrations that were below the MCL or non-detect. The yellow are wells that, well, it's above the MCL, but previously we've seen concentrations higher in this well. And then the orange and the red well are the ones that we're looking at as either for the orange ones, they're above the historical maximum and above the MCL. And for the red one, this is a well that's a first time exceedance of the MCL. So I'll walk through these individual wells on the next slide. So this is that little red dot that it's marked as being in the western principal aquifers. That's the category that we put the wells that either don't have construction information publicly available, or we see that there's screens in multiple aquifers in the western upper and the western lower. So we can't really pinpoint it to an individual aquifer. So for this well, if you look at the time concentration plot, the maximum contaminant level for nitrate is 10 milligrams per liter. And we can see that this well did reach that concentration previously, but it went above that concentration for the first time in this past water year. So on the next slide, we look at the water levels in surrounding wells. So in the annual report, we looked at the water levels in 2 nearby western upper principal aquifers and 1 nearby western lower principal aquifer well, just because we don't know exactly which well or which aquifer screens at this well. And we found that the water levels appeared to be stable. This is Van Buren shown here, and in all 3 of these wells, the water levels were above the MT for water levels. And so because the water levels are stable in this area, we concluded that the nitrate does not appear to be due to GSA management activity. So on the next slide, this well is one that had a further exceedance of the MCL. And so you can see at this well, this is a public supply well in the eastern principal aquifer. And the nitrate levels have been increasing pretty steadily since 2004. So that was prior to Sigma implementation. And so for this well, we determined that because the concentrations have been increasing and pretty steadily, this does not appear to be due to GSA management. There's likely some legacy loading in this area, and the nitrate is continuing to migrate towards this well, but it's not due to the GSA actions. Similarly, a well just north of this well is a public supply well that the concentrations have been kind of above and below the MCL for years. But in water year 22 and water year 23, the concentrations have been consistently above the MCL, and there was a new maximum that was set this past year. So for next slide. For this well, we looked also at the concentrations of surrounding water level representative monitoring wells and the water levels at these wells. And the water levels have been relatively stable and above MT this past water year and previous years. So this does not appear to be related to GSA management activities. And then the last well for nitrate is in the eastern principal aquifer. This is a public supply well east of Oakdale. And if we look at the nitrate concentrations, you can see them increasing really from about 2024, but a stark increase after 2014. And so these increases have been occurring prior to the GSP implementation. And also this is a rapid increase that does suggest that it could be due to a local source, such as a septic tank failure nearby, because it's been such a quick increase over the years. So this map shows the TCP concentrations, and as you can see in comparison to nitrate, there were fewer wells, and most of the wells that were observed were in the eastern principal aquifer. And for TCP, there was one potable water supply well that reported a further MCL exceedance. Go to the next slide. Also note that there was only nitrate and TCP that had first time exceedances and further exceedances. So the maps for the other constituents are in the annual report, but they don't have any wells that had to be looked at in there. So the well with the TCP further exceedance is shown here. The maximum contaminant level for TCP is 0.005 micrograms per liter. So the measurements are pretty sensitive. And we observed at this well this past year, there was a further increase of the MT. Overall, the concentrations have been above that maximum contaminant level. And so on the next slide, we looked at the nearby water levels and found that in the surrounding representative monitoring wells, the water levels were relatively stable the last few years, and they have remained above the MT. So this did not appear to be due to GSA management. So that wraps up the water quality results. Are there any questions about this?
Emergencies, any questions yet? Questions from the public? Anything on the phone? No hands. We can keep going. Thank you very much.
Okay, I will continue on, and the next thing I wanted to talk, we wanted to talk about the reported dry wells. So DWR has a dry well reporting system, as you probably know. In the water year 2023, there were 4 reports of dry wells. These are shown as the green dots on this figure. You can see they are all in the vicinity of Riverbank. The good news is all the cases were resolved. There were well depths for these, and the well depths range from 65 to 130 feet, so they're all relatively shallow. One of these wells was reported that sand and muddy water was being pumped out of the well, and so this to us seems like it's possibly a well casing problem and not necessarily a water level problem. And so of the 4 cases, maybe 3 of them were from water due to water level dropping, a casing problem. So the next I want to talk about subsidence. So this is the 3rd annual report, as you know, and in each of the previous 2 annual reports, we have been including a map like this that is based on lands on DWR's INSAR vertical displacement data. So this is the map for water year 2023, and it shows the vertical displacement data throughout the subbasin. The kind of light orange color is what you see throughout most of the subbasin, and this is indicates vertical displacement between 0 and 0.05 feet, which is up to 0.6 inches. So it's a negative vertical displacement of up to 0.6 inches, but this is within the error bars of the technology. In the eastern part of the subbasin, you see some of that darker colored orange. That is negative vertical displacement between 0.05 and 0.1 feet, which is equivalent to 0.6 to 1.2 inches in the negative direction. So we see the kind of clusters of darker orange in the eastern subbasin where we know we're having experiencing water level declines. We also see some grayish color in the very western subbasin near the San Joaquin River. This is where, according to the data, there was actually a slight rise in groundwater elevation. But again, it's within 0 to 0.05 feet, which is within the error bar of the technology. Moving to the next slide. So in the GFP, we included a figure of subsidence based on the same INSAR data that was between 2015 and 2019, maybe 2020, I forget exactly. But it was over a 3 or 4 year period. And we decided for this annual report to just extend that, to update it through the end of our year 2023. And that's what this map shows. So this is the cumulative net vertical displacement between June 2015 and September 2020, about an 8 year. What this shows is, again, most of the cumulative ground displacement is within the margin of error, which is plus or minus 0.05 feet. The gray area, it's colored, the color code on this is exactly the same as the previous figure. So the gray area is actually areas of the subbasin where the data indicate that the ground surface rose between 0 and 0.05 feet, which is 0.6 inches. And the light orange is where it dropped the same amount. So again, that's within the error bar, plus or minus. There are areas with the darker orange color in the eastern subbasin. You can see just sort of northeast, of Modesto Reservoir, sort of a cluster of that darker orange color. And in these areas, these are the highest rates, cumulative rates that we're seeing, and those areas are between 0.05 and 0.1. So it's between 0.6 and 1.2 inches of negative vertical displacement. And we also see some small clusters of the same in the very western subbasin, near the confluence of the Stanislaus and Central Rivers. There are also 2 GPS stations in the subbasin, and they're shown as red dots on the inset map on the bottom right hand part of this. The first one is in the western, within the Corcoran Clay extent, just south of the city of Modesto, or actually within the city of Modesto. And during water, and so this chart that I'm showing you is the data from that chart, from that station between 2006 and early 2024. Now during water year 2023, the data show that there was a net vertical displacement of negative 0.12 inches, so not much of a change. But from October 2006 to September 2023, there's a net vertical displacement of about 0.78 inches in the negative direction, so just under an inch. Again, not much, and in general, the ground surface elevation in this area is pretty stable. So the next slide. The second GPS station, the subbasin, is located in the very easternmost part of the subbasin, near the subbasin boundary. The station P306 also has data we're showing data from 2006 to early 2024. During the water year 2023, the net vertical displacement was negative 0.89 inches, just slightly less than 1 inch. But from July 2006 to September 2023, there was a net positive vertical displacement of about 1/3 of an inch. So again, relatively stable. We also, and I don't summarize that on the slide, but we received quarterly reports from for the monitoring program in Mapes Ranch, and they also monitor subsidence in the very western subbasin, and their data are consistent with what we're finding with the insetting ground surface is really stable. So that is it. Do you have any questions?
We have more on the model. We can. Well, this is the end of Liz's portion of the presentation, I think, right?
Yes.
So, questions from any of the other agencies?
More of a comment. I find it interesting that the largest fluctuations in land surface elevation occur in those wet curves in both stations.
Yes.
A little.
Yes.
It's interesting.
Yeah, I think so. The cyclic nature of these curves, what you're seeing is elastic subsidence. So you have, ground surface elevation that decreases during the hot summer, early fall months, right? When there's a lot of pumping going on. And then during the wet season, when there's less pumping, it comes back up. And so it's really interesting to see the cycles. And you're right, the cycles are kind of the changes are greater during these wet years.
It's a reverse what
Yeah, yeah, I think it's just a matter of, you know, that the highs are higher maybe, it's just, yeah. I think it would change.
Anybody else? Nope. Open it up to public comment. Questions? None on the phone, none here. Okay. Well, next we'll talk about the model. Dominic, you're going to lead us off with that. Dominic is from Woodard and Curran.
Good afternoon, everyone. Slide down.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a little bit of little bit under the weather, so I'll do my best. Thank you very much. Over the past few months, we have been effectively updating the groundwater model to incorporate latest data that the agencies provided, as well as utilizing all the publicly available data sets from state and federal government to develop a set of water budgets that were presented this past year. So our goal over the next few minutes is hopefully to give you a little bit of a presentation on kind of a feedback of what data goes into the model, how that is utilized by our groundwater model, and ultimately we'll look at some water budgets, hydrographs, and try to just give you a better picture of what is occurring basic and operational as well as to operators.
You mind introducing? I didn't justify your introduction there. Can you make sure that you let them know what your history is here within the basin and just on in the GSP and everything like that?
Absolutely.
This is you.
So my name is Dominic Amber. I'm with Woodard Curran. Been working on a variety of groundwater models for about 11 years now. And my history kind of within the basin, beginning in 2018, we started working with the Utah groundwater team on development of the GSP. And ever since then, we've developed a model, calibrated, ran a few scenarios for you during the development of the GSP. And in the past few years, this is actually our third annual report as far as being able to provide additional information to you on kind of the status of the basin. I brought with me my coworker, Jinan here. She has been with our team for about 5 years now. 6 years. Oh,
time flies.
yeah. And she actually has been working with me directly doing a lot of the modeling. Has been a tremendous help in actually doing most of the number crunching. So make sure I brought her with me because she'll answer any really hard questions. So.
Definitely some familiarity here in the basin. Okay, excellent. Thank you.
So as I mentioned a second ago, our goal of this effort is really kind of broken into kind of what I consider three main categories. Our first step is to basically compile all the information that we can. Both Liz and her team are doing a lot of observational data and present to you what is the publicly available data that is kind of directly affecting basin. We try to capture a little bit more of the operations, simulate that information, and then eventually compare that to the observed data. Right? Our models have the ability to help the basin kind of make projections, look at long-term conditions, how this from a planning perspective. So step one is compile data. Step two is incorporate that data into the model, update the model, and basically look at interpret some of those results. And ultimately, over the past couple of weeks, we've been very focused on the report. So the tech committee has had that available, and we're waiting for the public to Okay, so for anybody who members of the public who are less familiar with the annual report process, I just wanted to include a summary slide here, just kind of give you an idea of what this process is. So the GSP in general, we submitted it in January 31st, 2002. And as earlier, every year from then, it's our job to develop an annual report and present this information to the Department of Water Resources. Kind of give them again a status update as far as basic operations, and effectively kind of a little report card for how we're doing as we incorporate signal implementation forward towards our sustainability goals. So with that, effectively, just kind of reminder that this annual report for 2023, all the data that we have from October of 2022 through September of 2022. Slide, please. And so from an update perspective, our goal is to ultimately be able to inform you by providing sub-basin-wide water budgets as well as some of the management areas from an operational perspective. And then take a look at some temporal and spatial estimates of kind of what are our groundwater activities, what are groundwater production, changes in storage and aquifer. That's kind of ultimately what we need to provide to the state for the annual report. And so we want to make sure that we kind of have a little bit of conversation on the data. So our goal for this, again, is to really focus on extension of the existing model without making any major changes or major recalibrational efforts to the model itself. With the extension, there is a validation process. I will kind of go over that with kind of towards the end of my presentation. The goal of that is to take a lot of the observed data that was presented a few minutes ago in the previous meeting and combine that information with the simulated values so that we can have additional kind of and provide some additional confidence that the model is representing condition basically. Okay, so now kind of getting to what I got into. So the fun stuff is it's actually just some of my. So the goal for this again is to compile all the best available data. So it's a combination of providing information related to operations, surface, runoff use, then supplement that with some publicly available data from the state and federal government. So that'll be a combination of precipitation, evapotranspiration, land use, stream flow data, and ultimately some values. I'll go through each of these with you momentarily. Give you a little bit of perspective. Okay,
Excuse me, Dominic,
yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I have a request. If you could please move the microphone a little bit closer to your mouth.
Is that a little bit better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so then we'll take a look at some local information that we have available in addition to just pure water supply information. Our goal is to really get a good picture of really how that water is used, right? So from particularly from our surface water purveyors, we want to know not only what is diverted from the stream system from a surface water perspective and what eventually makes it to our growers from an aquaculture side of the equation. We also want to make sure that we have a good idea and understanding of what kind of happens along the way. So from a conveyance perspective, we capture reservoir operations, seepage from our canal systems, spills back into the operational spills back into the rivers. We kind of capture the full operational picture. And then from an urban and municipal perspective, again, we look at not only the groundwater pumping itself, but let's take a look at your population per capita water use. And in addition to that, look at some of the recycled water operations that we have, some of those deliveries, both within the Pesto and the Turlock subbasins, really make sure we kind of get a little bit of a holistic picture of where groundwater system is affected by any of our day-to-day operations. Okay, so now getting into some of our data. So precipitation comes from a data source called PRISM. It's developed by Oregon State University. It is effectively a nationwide data set that incorporates a combination of observed weather station precipitation data with some fairly complex climatic modeling. The goal of that, of which is to take the localized weather station data we have and develop kind of a spatial correlation to it. And this way, from a modeling perspective, we can make sure that we capture the spatial distribution of that precipitation. As a lot of us know, in general, as you kind of get further away from the central center of the valley, you kind of move a little bit further east into the foothills, you have a tendency to rain a little bit more, and you want to make sure that we capture that both from a runoff and from a infiltration perspective. And so we capture that with our groundwater. Overall, in this past year, it being a very wet year in 2023, had a little over 25 inches of precipitation, which is supplied us with some much needed repurity from a hydrologic. And here you can kind of see just a kind of temporal perspective of that, and kind of get an idea on what the kind of volumetric volumetric perspective, with the kind of precipitation that we're looking at. Again, both on this slide and kind of as we go through much of this presentation, you're certainly welcome to just take a look at the whole time series that we have. We've 33 years now that we've been modeling this Modesto subbasin. But again, I really want to kind of just draw our attention and really focus in on operations in the more recent period, right? This is an annual report, but we're focused on updating that model 2023 data. And so that's where kind of most of my presentation will be. But if you have any other previous questions prior to those last couple of years, please feel free to ask. Okay, so then when it comes, so we have water that comes into the system in the form of precipitation, and what is leaving our basin in the form of consumptive uses, predominantly evapotranspiration. So a major component of that evapotranspiration is temperature. And so we tracked temperature information over the full historical period. We say kind of a continuation of those rising temperatures and continued into 2023. But now comparing that to evapotranspiration directly, it's a little bit more complex because in addition to just temperature, there's a lot of other factors. Operations, hydrology, particularly cloud cover, soil irrigation, all go into transpiration. This is really what governs the vast majority of agricultural demand. So in order to utilize that information, we rely on the CIMMYS data set, which is published by the state of California. In fact, 3 to 4 direct measuring sites for evapotranspiration in this vicinity. We had 2 within the Modesto subbasin, 1 in Modesto and 1 in Oakdale, as well as 2 more in Turlock. I make sure I incorporate that for you because in general, we know that our model simulates both the Modesto and the Turlock subbasins. So, given the kind of interconnected relationship between the 2 basins, I thought I'll let you know, but take information, the whole picture throughout the models. So, in addition to that, is there a, can you skip them right now? Oh, sorry, I did it out of the level. It's okay. I'll jump around. When it comes, so the next major component we have is looking at some stream flow. So we want to make sure we want to incorporate some of the stream systems within our model, as those hydrologic systems have a major contributing source of water to the basin. And so we take data from a combination of USGS and CDEC, which is the state of California. Their extreme gauge information, as well as data from districts in the area of operations of reservoir systems, to both make sure that we capture inflow into the system and that more downstream stream gauges really inform us as to how accurate our model is simulating operations and conditions of the stream system. Okay, so this is a slide I could tell was a second ago, but then the other major component that you don't look at our operational demand and our overall water demand is property values from there, particularly from an agricultural perspective. And so, in addition to evapotranspiration, where that evapotranspiration is what is the land use and what are those crops that we're using that drives much lower demand. So we take a look at this data set, which is published by the Department of Water Resources and developed by a company called Land IQ. This combination of satellite imagery as well as some ground truthing efforts to provide parcel level numbers. So if we want to take a look at what that looks like on a kind of spatial component, overall, we kind of see in 2023 the continuation of development of some of our native to agricultural lands in the basin, as well as growth from urban. Okay. So now that we've gone through most of the factors on water and next is balance. So the data sets that go into effectively what is looking at our water supply, we heavily rely on some local irrigation districts, surface water delivery agencies. We rely on Modesto and Oakdale Irrigation District to provide us with how much water is being provided to their customers, as well as I mentioned earlier, to the operational data associated. In addition to both irrigation districts, there's also some riparian diversions that occur along the river systems. It's a little challenging to see on the screen, but those are kind of highlighted in the dark blue, predominantly in the western parts of the basin. And since a lot of those riparian diversions are not necessarily metered, what we do is we use state database called eRIMS that provides information related to those riparian areas water rights. And when the volume associated with those water rights kind of acts as a cap, and the model informs us as to what the demand is, and the assumption that that riparian surface water supplies are able to meet. So then now focusing on 2023 water years, we can take a look at like how much water was available from a surface water perspective. And so if you take a look at the last column on this chart, we see a combination of things. Both the surface water deliveries, the volumes the deliveries, the diversions, which is the total amount, deliveries from each agency with MID. And we see, in addition, that's the conveyance losses associated with that. Those are predominantly recharge and draw versus what's the seepage from each of those canals before the reservoir and the SRO system. So kind of the combination of all of them. So then, in addition to our surface water supply, again, probably what most of us are today discuss the groundwater operations. So groundwater operations are represented in a couple different ways, predominantly from an agency perspective, because that is public information, things that are to this effort is we have asked each of the agencies to provide their groundwater operations, their kind of well-specific pumping throughout each of to supplement. The well-specific pumping that is used to meet their urban and municipal demand. And so from a combination of both agricultural and municipalities, we have a couple of these charts here. You can see the overall pumping associated with the operations. Now, if we take a look at the agricultural pumping first, being that it was a very wet year this past year, and that we have additional surface water supply, as we would expect, it was based on these hydrologic conditions, we see a lot less pumping than the historical average. So that's why kind of the last column on the left-hand side of the chart, you'll see kind of the balance between the Modesto and the LID's groundwater pumping for this year. On the other hand, from an urban perspective, we see a kind of a very contained trend. Much of what we expect, municipal and industrial demands do not fluctuate dramatically from year to year related to hydrology, related to evapotranspiration. It's mostly because that it's looking at urban use, per person water use is fairly consistent. We certainly are able to capture some of the conservation efforts between various agencies, and so this information is kind of a culmination of the data that's provided by those agencies. So now we've had the opportunity to kind of go with those to discuss what goes into the model, and now take a look at how it comes out. So now the next couple of slides, we're taking a look at some of the water projects. We have both water budget for the entire basin, as well as looking at some of the formation forces. The goal is to take a look at the whole basin, because that's what the signal really focusing on, full basin management. But in order to understand kind of the conditions and the various factors of managing this basin, it's important to look at additional level of detail of those individual zones. So overall, what we'd like to kind of start with is what you guys see here. This is land and water use budget. So this really dictates the balance of a lot of the things that I addressed earlier, which is the water demand and water supply. So in both of these charts, we look kind of in a negative direction of that's our demand. And so similar to what I discussed in a couple of slides, we see a really cool things as we look at the 2023 budget. So particularly the 2023 water year, agricultural demand, you can see it's a little bit less overall, fairly similar, but a little bit less compared to the past couple of years. And that's going to be a combination of growth of agricultural land, so we have a demand perspective of serving more acres, but that is offset fairly significantly by the combination of precipitation and evapotranspiration. Particularly in the early months, the early irrigation season, we had more natural precipitation supplying water to each of those fields, as well as the reduced evapotranspiration due to increased cloud cover. Kind of a combination of those two things really means that overall, this past year, our demand is down a little bit, a few percent, but in general, very consistent with what we expect to see. And then on the positive side, we see the balance of what meets that supply, that meets that demand, both surface water deliveries, as well as groundwater pumping. You can see the combination of those two things is fairly equal in this basin. You see about a little bit more than 50% of the demand in the basin is met by surface water supply. And again, the percentage of that being a wet year, being that we have additional surface water supplies, we see a little bit less overall groundwater pumping in 2023 compared to the last couple of years that were much drier. So then the next step is to take a look at what we call our operational budget. Now, this is 3 factors out of about 6 that make up our groundwater budget. So our operational budget is a combination of groundwater pumping, deep percolation, and recharge. In this case, we classify recharge as predominantly related to the water that is supplied directly from the conveyance systems and the reservoir. So what you can kind of see here, it's kind of a continuation of the story that I've presented over the past few slides. Groundwater pumping is down, predominantly related to our hydrology and slightly reduced evaporative demand. But and on the positive side, again, what goes into the groundwater system, predominantly in the green, you can see that we have a lot more precipitation than we have in the here. This is going to be very specifically related to increased precipitation over this past year, particularly in the winter spring. So because of that, the combination, deep percolation is also a combination of applied and precipitation, applied water precipitation. But the growth of it, you can see, is mostly, not all, but mostly going to be related to increased precipitation next year. And then over on the right-hand side, you can kind of see the net value of that. So effectively, that's kind of the combination of those 3 bars kind of go into one. You see what it is from an operational perspective, regardless of the other hydrologic conditions of the basin. From an operational perspective, are we a net contributor or a net extractor from the groundwater system? So comparatively to past years, our overall net extraction in the negative direction is much smaller than previous years. We expect that with being a wet year in the operations that we have, we're much closer to being balanced. But for the basin as a whole, we see about a net extraction of groundwater about 24,700 acre feet.
So in this, if you don't mind, so in this slide, you can see here, and pre 2007, we were predominantly recharging, and then after 2007, we were predominantly overdrafting. Right?
Yeah.
And that's because of
that's predominantly related to agricultural expansion through most of the basin. Some obviously there's certainly urban growth as well and increased demand, but that's kind of generally the balance.
So the development of that non-district east likely.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. No, in a couple of slides we'll break down into kind of the same last 2 slides that I have. We'll break those down for each of the management areas to kind of give you a little bit of perspective as to where a lot of these numbers are changing, kind of like the management areas, how to interact with them.
Thanks.
So now diving into each of those management areas. The first one is the Modesto area. This is a combination the non-combination most of the western parts of the basin, Modesto irrigation district, as well as the city of Modesto, Riverbank, most of that area. What we can see here is kind of like this balance that in general we see fairly consistent. Some growth in the from the 1990s through about 2015 or so. We see a little bit of continued growth in the western parts of the basin, and then 2015 onward, we see some conservation efforts going to see kind of level. In general, we also with Western area, we see kind of again 50-50 split, very similar to the basin as a whole. It's a surface water supply. That cultural perspective, urban and municipal side of things. This is you can kind of see a combination of population growth as well as conservation. Those kind of offset on that. There's a large effort in kind of the 2000s that really reduced the overall municipal and industrial water demand, and so that's effectively captured. The other thing that we draw your attention is the on the water supply side, we capture kind of Five is the getting a supply of surface water to the city. So we go from being purely groundwater based operations and see that as such use operation. So then taking a look at the operational water budget, again, this is what how we interact with the groundwater system, at least on a vertical scale, so it's directly impact. So here you can kind of see a little bit of a similarity to the basin as a whole. The kind of combination again, in 2023, we see a lot more population throughout the basin for the hydrology. But overall, you can see that change. So that in western parts of the basin, particularly, we see kind of a approximate balance in the early parts of our historical period, but then kind of mid 2000s on kind of somewhat consistent overall net extraction. Then when it comes again focusing on this past year, 2023, we see that balance of that thanks to the precipitation path that 2023 actually net recharger in this area. Okay. So then looking at the major, the next major surface water combination of the surface water supplied by Oakdale Irrigation District as well as the city of Oakdale being combined into this calling the Oakdale Management Area. We see very consistent demand over the long historical period, and that demand is predominantly met with surface water supply. Obviously, in some of our drought years, particularly in the 2013 drought, we see some additional groundwater use, but overall, Oakdale meets most of its demand by surface water. Similarly, when taking a look at the urban and municipal water use, we see kind of a very consistent overall use, and that's kind of the balance of increasing population with additional conservation, kind of a balance of those two, plus very consistent, somewhat flat long-term trend in urban use. But comparatively to the previous management area, there's no surface water supply that made available to for urban use. So we'll see that it's entirely different. So then we're taking a look at the operational water budgets for Oakdale. As you'd expect with an area that doesn't rely on groundwater production as heavily to meet its water demand, we see that overall we see a net recharge to the groundwater system for the Oakdale management area, totaling about 30,000 acre feet in this past year. But contrary to the past couple of slides that we take a look at, you can see that more consistently Oakdale is a net contributor to the system. You can still see the development and the increased demand. You kind of see that Oakdale was providing additional recharge early in the period from the 1990s and early 2000s. But then more recently, they've been a little bit closer to being overall in balance, although they can maintain predominantly the net recharge. Okay, so then taking a look at the two non-district areas. So, and I know these are a little bit harder to see, and far much shorter to kind of see the exact trends, but we wanted to make sure that we are consistent and are able to show you kind of the relative magnitude of each of these areas compared to one another. So the non-district west area is a much smaller area, and again, most of the non-district west is going to be a riparian dominated area, so there's a lot of water supply. So based on that, I don't have a map, but these are basically the areas that are kind of outskirts of Modesto ID. And so these are areas that do have access to riparian surface water. Most of them do have surface waters. So based on that, you can kind of see when we look at the operational water budget, that in general, they're fairly in balance. You can kind of see on the right-hand side, it kind of spikes a little bit around that midpoint. Some years being contributor, some years being extractor, but in general, fairly net zero. And we see 2023 is right, similar to the others we have in net recharge of about 6,000. And then taking a look at the non-district area, this is the area where the two units are seeing water. So because of that, actually, you can kind of see there. So you can see that the non-district area increased demand, expansion of areas, increased overall demand is moving entire, almost entire. White farmers. There is some service, some out of district sales from some of these areas, but the vast majority of supply is to meet the demand. Because of that, you can see that when taking a look at their operational water budget in general, you can see that kind of during the early 1990s or through the early 2000s, this area has been a predominant net extractor of water from the basin, and has continued to grow effectively over these past 30 years. And so, but what other, even to these groundwater dominated areas, because with these groundwater dependent areas, without surface water supply are still beneficiaries of the very wet year that we had, the increased precipitation, leads to increased infiltration, percolation. So where we are seeing some mitigated overdraft from this area in the past year in 2020. So overall, the net recharge is actually an extraction in the non-district piece of about 70,000. Which brings us to I hope it's kind of a big picture. So overall, what we have here is the sub-basin as a whole, for groundwater budget. As I mentioned earlier, we manage the sub-basin as a whole, out of the entire GSA. And so because of that, this is really the big picture to you. So again, focusing on first on the last year in 2023. This chart we take the information that we had from the past couple of slides. We're looking at pumping in the gray, deep percolation in the green, and our overall conveyance recharge in the purple. We add a couple of other features to that. We look at our subsurface flow, because we're all connected throughout the entire Central Valley Basin, as well as our stream and aquifer interaction, and that's what mainly makes up the flows to and from our groundwater system. So taking a look at the Modesto subbasin, I predominantly want to also make sure I point out the contribution we receive from the stream system. So I made a point earlier to let you know that we rely on some of the surface water districts as well as some data from the state to be able to represent the stream system that are surrounding the Modesto subbasin. So we dynamically simulate Stanislaus, Tuolumne, and the San Joaquin River, and the contributions of those rivers to our groundwater system. So you can see that in this past year, as we would expect, a very, very light year, both within the basin and within our upper watersheds. And so the addition of that surface water traveling through the rivers that are around us can contribute a very significant amount of water to the subbasin. Overall, we can see that our gain from stream is about 103,000 acre feet. That's done a tremendous benefit to our overall storage within the basin. And that is a combination of just purely the volume of water that is being put down the rivers and natural stream aquifer interaction that we have contributing to our system. In addition to that, we also note, although to a much lesser degree, we have inflow and subsurface inflow from the east, which is from the foothills about 10,000 acre feet, as well as we actually have, I believe, there's a net outflow of subsurface water, net combination between the three adjoining subbasins, also about 15,000, 16,000 acre feet. So the balance of that, and again, I feel like the final take-home message of all this is that in general, our storage in the basin for this year was a very wet year, 77,800 acres. So the next slide will kind of show you both groundwater levels and the storage which will to. Okay. So one of the major components that we have to present to the WR as far as when evaluating our annual report is basically present this as one of the attachments to our annual report, as well as our breakdown of some of the groundwater production. So what you kind of see here is a breakdown. On the right-hand side, you can see the distribution of overall pumping in the basin between agency pumping versus private pumping, as well as agricultural versus industrial use. And so overall, you can kind of see that the vast majority of the pumping in the basin, about 240,000 of it, is private agricultural pumping. So that's going to be most heavily focused on the kind of non-district eastern parts of the basin. We kind of went through a little bit of our operations a moment ago. And you can kind of see that in the scene map here. You can see that the kind of darker orange color being related to on the eastern parts of the basin where the lack of surface water supply, reliance on groundwater to meet that demand. You can see that as sort of bulk of that groundwater. Now, in addition to that, we also see a good amount of both private and agency pumping on the western parts of the basin throughout MIT. Again, MIT is about a 50-50, 60-40 split between surface water supply and groundwater production. And we can see that here. That's that distribution. Now, there's the combination of private growers pumping water as well as what the agencies to us. In addition to the agricultural pumping, from an urban perspective, you can kind of see a little bit of the heat map. We'll show you kind of where each of the major municipalities are. We can kind of see the agency pumping that we have for each of the municipalities, and being one offset of that is the city of Modesto, and that's due to kind of mixed use, being a given combination of both the footprint as well as their surface water supply they get from Modesto ID. They overall have a slightly less groundwater pumping per acre than most of the basin. So overall, we can see the basin total again is about 300,000.
So 1.2.
That's 300,000 divided by approximately 300,000. So it's a definitely wide amount. So if we want to get into change in storage, which is partially related to an elevation change, although there are some nuances to that, but I can connect with in a moment. One of the other major components that we'll provide for their annual is a breakdown of change in storage by principal aquifer as well as the basin as a whole. So the next couple slides will kind of show you that similarly to the previous map, kind of where we're experiencing some change in storage. So as a reminder, it's a great year. We have increased storage over this past year of about 77,000 acre feet. And so that's the breakdown as far as looking at principal aquifers. We can see here that on the western side of the basin, western border, western third or so, the western upper principal aquifers charge about 18,000 feet. And again, as we pretty heavily focused, you can see this particular stream operations. See that here is a lot of stream aquifer interaction, a lot of stream seepage from the Baltic River, something the San Joaquin as well. Based on that, you can see a lot of increase in storage, increased water levels along the Baltic River. So similarly, taking a look at the western parts of the basin, but now we're deeper aquifers. This is subcorporate. Still, we see an increase in storage in the western principal aquifer, although certainly less because it's not directly correlated, or it's not directly connected to the river systems that we have. Now there's some travel between the upper and lower principal aquifers, but it's fairly muted because of the corporate play. And there's also some flow from the east to the western lower principal aquifer in this case. So, but in general, we see that this area sees a net increase in storage of about 12,000. Okay, then when taking a look at the eastern principal aquifer, again, this is a fairly large area, encompasses the majority of the basin. We can see that there's increasing about 22,000 acres. Now, what you kind of see here, it's a little hard for any of the audience that doesn't have a paper in front of them, but you can see based on this, we actually have areas that are both increasing and storage. So this is reflected in the groundwater levels that we see throughout the basin. Similar to the western principal aquifer, if we look predominantly along the Tuolumne River, and although some along the Stanislaus as well, that's where you're going to see the greatest gains. Right? So if you remember, there's about 100,000 acre feet of stream aquifer interaction contributing to our groundwater system. And so there's a good amount of recharge occurring along the river systems. And so we're the beneficiary of that. On the other hand, on the eastern sections of the basin, particularly in some of those non-district use areas, being groundwater dependent areas, having a net extraction from the basin, you'll see some of those areas here, kind of the orange, both orange, light and dark orange, kind of see a net decline in storage throughout these areas, as well as a decline in water levels too, which I'll show you. And so, but the overall balance, that's something we have to report to you which was for our storage by the principal aquifer and the subbasin as a whole to kind of see, basically a balance of some gaining areas and some net reductions in operations. Next slide, please. And then, as I said earlier, we have a total storage about 78,000 acre feet, an increase. This is kind of the culmination of all three principal aquifers. This is kind of the overall picture, and similar to what I said a few months ago. We see a lot of recharge on the river systems, and we see some hotbeds associated with pumping operations. Particularly, we see some declines in the non-district east areas, as well as some here. So a little bit of decline near Sebasto. But overall, kind of this is kind of a big picture balance kind of operations. Okay, so now we have what we consider kind of validation stage. We take all that data, we have input and output information, try to make sure we can make sense of it, and that it has the ability. We have model has the ability to be backed up by some groundwater logs, which is predominantly what I'm going to show you there. Okay, so what you'll see in the next one slides.
Yeah, you're fine. Yeah, 15 minutes is work.
Okay.
Should be good.
So what we have on so what I have actually here is a combination of things. So this is principally a groundwater hydrograph where it shows in the black dots you'll look at estimated observed data as well as what the model is simulating. If you're curious where this well is located, there should be a map there on the right hand side, and that darker color is kind of effectively the location. Obviously, we don't have time to go into the hundreds of wells that observed data that we have, so I've kind of just taken a kind of a brief subset of that to kind of give you all, kind of walk you through the basin from kind of west to east, so we can get an idea of how the model is performing, as well as how we're doing simulating the system, as well as looking at observed data and make sure that we capture, particularly focusing on 2023, how the model is handling the conditions of the model. And so as you kind of look through some of these, and you're welcome to kind of peruse them. But we kind of focus on a couple of main things here. So one is that regardless of what well we're looking at, kind of just a general reminder, and we may have talked about it a couple of times in the past, due to model resolution, due to a lot of uncertainties associated with production, operations, there's always so much level of detail that a regional model like this can provide. So in general, we're not looking for picture perfect replication of observed to simulated data, but our main goal is really to capture a lot of the trends that we're seeing here. So we're kind of big picture. It's good to look at these wells and try to be as close to them, replicate them as close as we can, but just due to some simple uncertainties that we will see some variation between observed and simulated data. But I want to focus here, really looking at the 2023 data. You can see both simulated and observed in general, which you'll see both in this slide as well as the next several, is that you'll see that we are not only is the groundwater level recovering in observed data in the model as well. So you'll see that a little bit over the past couple of years. We've had 2 back-to-back critical years, as we see a lot of decline over those years, and then we get away. So we hope to see a little bit of recovery. We just see that for the next few slides. You didn't All right, so again, moving a little further to the east compared to the past 2 slides, we have kind of the same general story. That's a we see long-term decline, which we know is occurring throughout our basin. But again, a little bit of recovery this past year due to kind of the hydrology condition. Again, a little bit further, again further to the east. Grab the well next to the Colony River. This is an area we know there's a lot of recharge from the river itself. And again, we kind of see an increase in water levels of 10 to 15. Here we can see that both observations. All right, now taking a look, kind of getting a little bit more central to the basin. We can see we're beginning to kind of get into some of the eastern non-district areas where we kind of can see we continue to overdraft. We're getting the center of the basin, so we don't see as much of a benefit, particularly from the stream groundwater interaction and the recharge associated with that. And so because of that, we don't necessarily see a lot of the rebound that we saw in some of the previous slides. We certainly this past year have mellowed out a little bit of the decline, but we don't, and so we're not declining, we're not necessarily increasing our level of recovery in this area, but we do see kind of a mellowing out due to the local hydrology. And again, kind of moving a little bit further east, this is really right next to Modesto Reservoir. And so with this one, again, you have the combination of both the Columbia River itself as well as recharge from the reservoir. And so because of that, you're going to see a little bit more muted overall decline throughout the whole historical period. But again, able to capture that the contribution from the river from the reservoir system, and you see that an increase in water levels in this area. And then again, looking at kind of now we're a little bit further into purely the non-district eastern area. Again, center of the basin, which we don't see a lot of stream up groundwater interaction, being a predominantly a groundwater dependent area. He's trying to much similar to what we expect, just continued overdraft and continued decline in groundwater level. So both the model and the associated effective penalty. I think that's it. Yep,
That's
okay.
good.
Awesome. So with that, I know I threw a lot of information at you, but happy to answer any questions that you have.
Anything from a member agency's questions, comments?
You go over 2007 again, so the big discrepancy, I was trying to understand.
You turn on I think is your mic on? Okay.
Sorry, can you go over the, in 2007, saw a big discrepancy. I think it's additional agriculture was installed.
Is this the land use or one of the water budgets, or you mind pointing me to
Yeah.
just what I'm using?
Where I brought it out.
It was in the Modesto.
I think it was the basin wide actually.
Basin-wide net recharge.
Wow. So, I got a slide for 7. Show basically recharging, etc. And all of a sudden we jumped in, we're now removing water from the, I was just wondering what happened in that period to cause that such a dramatic change.
Sure. So I don't think this is any single, not a single event. There's not, there wasn't a large change in our operations. One of the things you can definitely kind of see from here is the gradual shift from a contributor to a.
It is, but it just seems like it does kind of go down and kind of continue through. So
Absolutely. So yeah. So and part of that is that in 2005, 2006 were wetter than normal years. So that's why you kind of see a little bit of a decline. You see those 2 years that are on contribution to the system. Those are like years similar to this past year. Comparatively to the 2 bars adjacent to it, there's a lot of difference. That's due the kind of the intra-year play. You see kind of the spikiness of it is effectively most commonly related to hydrology. And then the long-term trend is related to, in general, agriculture or urban expansion. Basically, our demand is increasing, has increased, very consistently over the past 30 years. And then the intra-year spikes you're going to see are going to be related positively. Obviously, you're going to see very wet years, and then very similarly, you can have exactly 2013, 2015, 2014, 2015. But in that 2013 to 2015 drought, that's why you see that very big spike in negative direction as well. Just hydrologically related.
I would say, in my opinion, majority of that is agriculture. The 2006, 2007, 28, especially you didn't have a lot of urban expansion.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can see that actually if you go one slide up, you can yes, you can see that with kind of the green bar here. You can kind of see that it's there's a very continued, particularly throughout the 2000s, you'll see a lot of increase, predominantly agricultural demand, and exactly what you said. You're on the urban side of that equation, you actually see some reduction in demand. In the later half of the 2000s. So yes, that's predominantly agricultural use.
Going into the 2010s, likely due to conservation efforts.
Absolutely, yes.
Anything else? Okay, we'll field questions from the public as well now. In the room. Do you mind handing over that? Just so you can pull the microphone out, actually. Just the people over the phone can hear you.
Sorry, you might have mentioned it, but I was wondering how was it that you pulled
like private, urban, and ag data.
So effectively, we don't have direct data for any private use. We rely on a lot of agencies to provide their information. As agencies, they have that data and they're, effectively have a strong desire to help and contribute to connections. Simply just due to the number of private well owners they have throughout the basin, it's very challenging to collect that data. And so we don't have. What we do have is this is where we rely on the model for a lot of the information we have to estimate that data. And so predominantly, as an example, we know that if an area specifically even a specific parcel does not have any surface water supply or some mix of the volume of surface water going to a parcel, we know that demand from ET data, a combination of measured ET from the SIMA stations, as well as some sensing data that looks on a kind of effectively on a parcel or pixelized 30-meter resolution data. And so we know their demand. And so the demand, and we know that if they have surface water, we know whether or not they need to supplement that surface water with groundwater. If they don't have surface water, we know that that demand has to be met with something. So the model is able to kind of help us do that calculation and estimate how much water is needed to.
Yeah, I was also just like knowing that there's industries that are pumping as well. This is kind of how that might be measured. Well, thank you.
If you don't mind, I need to get better at this. If you don't mind stating your name before you start talking, just so Jennifer's on the phone taking minutes, so it helps us. If you don't mind, you don't have to, but if you don't mind, it would help. It makes it easier for her to do the minutes.
This is this. I was just curious about the data regarding in-district agricultural use. So you're gathering it from MIT, but I was wondering if their data is good enough to, because I know of lands in districts that have access to surface water and they have turnout and everything, right? So they're just pumping. So I'm just wondering if the districts actually account for that, or if that's just lumped into the non-district area. They go 3,500 acres of non-district area, and they form the first way that they only use under 50% of surface water, which means they're pumping at least 50% of the rest of their needs. So I'm just wondering how that's accounted for, or is it accounted?
So effectively within our model, we have what's called a finite element group. So what that does is every element of the model is all the calculations are effectively done at that level of resolution. And I believe there should be a slide you have showing this. But effectively, that's the level of resolution that we have for use of the model itself. Now, what we do is we're able to aggregate data from the districts and provide surface water delivery data at that level of resolution. So it's not a parcel level of data that goes into our model, although I'll let the district speak to this, but they're not parcel level, or they track parcel level surface water deliveries. And so what we have for you actually might go that this surface water should be about 10 slides.
This one?
No,
This.
Thank you. So effectively, you kind of see here through each of those little semi squares, those polygons, is what each model element, what all the calculations are. That's the highest resolution that I have available. So we compile data from districts to feed surface water into those areas. And so you can actually kind of see it here too, is effectively the white area that's not covered by the surface water is the area that we're considering the non-district.
Yeah, I understand the location, but I guess I'm asking more so about the resolution, right? Because there are permanent orchards planted, and does it just make the overall look like we have a better average year? the crops use less water, or is it actually accounted for? Oh, this place is always pumping groundwater.
So the,
Because I guess where I'm getting like into this here, it's like, does it just make like the excess pumping in these in-district areas, right? Is that fully accounted for by OID, or is that lumped into non-district use overdraft?
so any in-district pumping, basically based on the state, that spatial distribution that we had. If a parcel is within OID or within OID, but has connected to pump groundwater, that is captured in that district's water budget. They're not. So the management areas are identified spatial. So any grower that chooses not to utilize their full line of surface water, we estimate the line. And I think you can see that in some of these water budgets here. That you can see here that Oakdale Avenue, the Oakdale management area have a significant amount of groundwater pumping as well. And that is that instance that we're talking about. So to access the surface water, when they have a cheaper way.
So essentially, I believe there's a total, you have a total demand. You know how much surface water we divert and deliver. And then there's the balance, and that balance of demand is met by deep wells or groundwater pumping, right? So like in this, I know last year, for example, off the top of my head, OID's groundwater pumping was about 1,500 acre feet, but you can see based on the scale of this, it looks closer to 35, 40, 50, I don't have the number, but it's significantly more than 1,500 acre feet because you wouldn't even see a little tiny blip on there. So there is pumping in OID's area that is private pumping accounted for in the model based on that, right, Dominic?
Yeah, so I was just more confused because it said it doesn't have a meter.
Right. Same with the same approach. It's just that none of that surface water is being
So
deducted.
it is an estimation.
Right. Yes.
And it is accounted.
Yeah, and that estimation is a combination of soil parameters, land use, ET data that we have, some assumptions related to kind of irrigation methodology. Right, we try to do our best to capture it's at least at an aggregated level, we try to capture high efficiency irrigation methods, given the first rate comparatively to flood that is often seen more common things.
Thank you.
A comment. I just wanted to make a point that it's Grace Stevens, Stanislaus County, that back to what Mike was saying about the data from the 2007 on. In 2014 is when our extraction permitting program went into effect for the county. So after that day, we didn't permit any significant additional agricultural uses in the non-district east. So any of that increase that we see in those two graphs could be attributed to, additional demand by existing crops due to drought conditions or other, but it wasn't because of, new permitted agricultural uses. So after that date, we issued, I think just it could have been 2 extraction permits, but likely just one, for the Modesto subbase. And so when that happened and when that program went into effect, it effectively curbs new converted land uses that would accrue additional groundwater demands that went through our secret permitting process.
Yeah. Although when you permitted the last wells, you would think typically you put a new well in, then you put the orchard in, and then it grows. So as the first year, you have very little demand, and that incrementally grows. So it would still take some years to increase,
I
right?
was thinking, that as well, but I just want to be good. The county's not permitting.
Yeah, I'm just thinking the trend probably reflects that a little bit too. Yeah. Yeah.
Did a really good job showing that it was very easy to understand.
Any other public comment? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands up on the phone either. Yeah, nice job. Thank you. Both Todd groundwater and water recurring. Thank you very much. So the plan is to come back in 2 weeks. And so first of all, the plan will be available to the public tomorrow. It'll be posted on the website, and got some time to review that. And then hopefully we'll wrap up that version and draft the day before the meeting, and then we'll come back to the meeting on the 27th. So 2 weeks from today will be the meeting when we're hoping to adopt this annual report. So you've got a little more time to look at it, and the public obviously has some time to look at it as well.
But I think we're asking public comments by the 20th.
Yeah, a week from tomorrow. Does that ring a bell? Week from the public comment, or sorry, yeah, public comment on the feedback on the annual report. Makes sense. And then we'll come back a week later and we'll adopt it here, because we'll have a final draft that you'll take in consideration those public comments, and then we'll get that final draft done. Okay, thank you. Okay, that was just the discussion item, so we'll move on to number 5, which is just the next meeting. Just mention that'll be on the 27th, 2 weeks from today, again at 1:30 in person here at Oakdale Irrigation District. We'll have the Zoom option available as well. Number 6, items, or I guess I'll take some public comment, any agency comment on that. Questions on the next meeting date? Okay. Item 6, are there any items too late for the agenda, or agency member comments?
Yeah, I've got one for my need. So we are busy getting our conveyance system ready for the irrigation season. Expect first deliveries next week on the 20th, but we were able to uncap our allocation. So that means our long-term groundwater replenishment program is in place. So I just want to encourage anyone that's interested to visit our website, give our offices a call, and we can get you the information you need on an application.
Same for OID. So we're bringing water in actually tonight to slowly start filling the system. The majority of the deliveries will start on the 18th. And we had board action last week to declare surplus water. So we're making water available for all of our 10-year added district program participants as well. No cap on deliveries this year. Anything else?
Yes, I'll just add that if that is the case, and we have anyone that's within the district boundaries and has access to surface water, I would encourage you to utilize the surface water first and foremost, and not pump unless you absolutely have to.
Absolutely. Okay. And a motion to adjourn? All right. Tim made the motion, John gave the second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion to meeting adjourned, rather. Thank you, everybody.